Is he hearing now? Can you hear me now? We are live. Okay, good. Okay, good. You say we are live now, yeah. Okay.
Where's the folder?
Oh. Now.
I hear you. No, I don't want tea. Anybody who sees this, will think that.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Which part of the world you're in? We appreciate your joining in today for this live session of the Tell Africa. We also apologize for the slight delay in coming online. When you're dealing with high-profile individuals, we have to work within their timing and space.
I know. I won't accept that. It's your machine. I was.
We want to most sincerely appreciate His Excellency also for making our time for this all-important session. Tell Africa is a platform where we engage former presidents and former leaders in Africa on accountable leadership after their exit in office. And since we commenced this process, the inaugural session, which started in Mozambique in 2021, had the former president of Mozambique and the current chairperson of the former president of Africa, President Joaquim Chissano, as the inaugural guest. We've engaged former leaders outside Nigeria, and we are opportune to interact and engage the former president of Nigeria, His Excellency President Olusegun Obasanjo, as the first former leader in Nigeria that will be coming up on the Tell Africa platform. And since Tell Africa has been on board, the feedback, the acknowledgement has been the platform has evolved in a way that it's been stimulating, it's been revealing, and it's also been a knowledge-driven platform. So without wasting much time, we will dive into this particular session. And before asking His Excellency to start responding to some of the questions that we'll be asking him, questions around foreign relations, foreign diplomacy, questions around domestic interventions, around conflict management, around the elections, how he's been able to take some critical decisions. What are the impacts of those decisions? I mean, when you don't make some decisions, when they're When you are indecisive, does that also amount to decisions? Because we understand that following reactive and proactive policies and engagements, arising from proactive and reactive engagements or policy decisions, central to that is leadership. And that is why we find it very important to engage former leaders in Africa and blend it with some academic discourse so that people are better informed on how to make decisions when it comes to leadership, when it comes to governance, when it comes to conflict management, among other things. Before I call on the Executive Director of African Leadership Foundation to give an opening remark, I want to most appreciate the ALF, the Executive Director, and the founder, His Excellency President Olusegun Obasanjo, for partnering with us on this initiative, as well as the Nigerian Institute for International Affairs, that has been an abiding partner in this engagement across Africa and the globe. We celebrate you. So without much ado, I'm going to call on Dr. Ajayi, who is the Executive Officer, to give us an opening remark that is linked to the theme of this subject matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adeolu. I want to, on behalf of the African Leadership Foundation, welcome all of us to this Experiential Leadership Program, which is jointly organized by Tell Africa, the African Leadership Forum, and the Nigerian Institute for International Affairs. When Mr. Adeolu first brought this idea to me, I said, well, this is fine. This is in line with the programmatic trajectory of the African Leadership Foundation, and we'll be willing to collaborate with him in this regard. The African Leadership Foundation was established in 1988 by His Excellency Chief President Olusegun Obasanjo as a Pan-African civil society organization tasked with the mission to assist improving capacity of leaders across Africa. And we have been able to do this focusing on the area of leadership, governance, gender and development, digital and economic empowerment, and sustainable development and peace for the past 35 years. We have thrived, and we are happy to say that under the leadership of His Excellency, we have been able to move ALF to engage with leaders both at all levels, junior, middle level, and senior level, and we have been able to contribute to development within the continent. For example, today we all heard about NEPAD, about APRM. It's actually as a result of the program that earlier developed by His Excellency called the Conference on Security, Stability, and Cooperation in Africa, which we call the CSSDCA. Apart from that, ALF has concentrated many years trying to train young people in the area of democratic leadership, and many of our trainees and ex-ALF participants have gone ahead to make impact both in the private sector and also in the public sector. Of recent, ALF, working with the African Union, has been able to also move into the area of human rights accountability mechanism, in which we have been able to develop what is now known as Maputo Protocol scorecard and index that is being used to actually measure the performance of member states in actually implementing the content of this, which is part of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. On economic empowerment, ALF over the years, in the last 15 years or so, are deeply involved in raising young businessmen, young entrepreneurs, and we have been able to train up to 36,000 entrepreneurs and facilitate small loans for them. And so we are so happy when we heard that, okay, this is going to take place. It's a need for us to also learn from the wealth of experience of His Excellency and guide future leaders who will also be involved in the area of governance and leadership, both in private and public sector. Once again, on behalf of the ALF, I wish to welcome you to this interactive session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ajayi, for that very helpful introductory remark, which has set us on a very good stead for this session. I'm going to call on Professor Ehosa Osage, who is a profound academic and has also distinguished himself in administration. He's a global citizen, I would call him, I would refer to him like that. And we appreciate you for your support over the time that we've been involved together in this. And over to you, Your Excellency, Professor Ehosa Osage.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah,
Yes, we can.
Good afternoon, Your Excellency, Baba Africa.
Professor, thank you very much. It's nice seeing you, beaming with smiles. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Baba. Every time we have thought of Africa, I think, we have all come to agree that, there are those people that stand out as pillars for referencing Africa in various dimensions. The reason we call President Obasanjo Baba Africa is that he is very, very prominently and eminently a deep, deep pillar for Africa. Baba Africa has led from the front in virtually every respect, up until the last minute when, most recently, he led the peace process in Ethiopia. Baba Africa has been at the vanguard, of a Pan-Africanist movement. And the Africa Leadership Forum is one that showed the world how very forward-looking Baba Africa was that long ago. He's been, virtually everything that Africa would need. In South Africa, you cannot, write the history without the name of, General Olusegun Obasanjo, as it then was. He contributed very, very immensely and prominently with such great dignity and, flair to the transition in the country, the release of Mandela and the subsequent post-apartheid transition. The liberation of the whole of Southern Africa, those liberation movements and so on, owe a lot to his leadership of Nigeria at the time. Now, if we want to talk globally, he also has to be one of the best known, Africans of this generation. The world acknowledges him in every respect. I don't remember if there was any important committee that was global in nature that didn't have an Obasanjo imprint. Now, when this whole conversation series started, we had the President Chissano of Mozambique. And the whole idea was to say, look, people like President Obasanjo have seen it all. They are in front and they are still here. Why don't we engage them so that, we can learn the right lessons from them? Leadership is not something that you bring from heaven. Leadership is something that is grown and constructed and is put in practice in our lives. Baba Obasanjo has seen it at the national level. He's seen it at the continental level. He's seen it at the global level. In all of this, we remember the great things he has done. But perhaps there are things, upon reflection, he would say, maybe if I had another opportunity, I would not do it this way. Maybe I made some mistakes. Maybe I didn't know that these things would turn out to be like this. Were there things, for instance, he didn't think highly about that turned out to be game changers and world beaters in manners that he himself didn't expect? So this is the essence of this conversation. And we thought we should bring on board Professor Richard Joseph, one of the most committed Africanist scholars of the American extraction. Professor Richard Joseph, has Africa in mind when he wakes up and when he goes back to sleep. in his writings, in his scholarship. He has been African at heart. And his greatest worry today is, why is Nigeria, for instance, not where it should be? Why is Africa not where it should be? And so we thought we should bring him to engage this process and have a robust discussion. On behalf of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, we'd like to say how very glad and proud we are to be partnering with Adewumi and all of us at the AFL on this project. Tell Africa has come to stay, and there are many more things that we would achieve together. So, Baba, I welcome you. I'm very glad that we are able to have you on this forum. The whole of Africa is waiting to learn from you. The whole world is waiting to learn from you. Professor Richard Joseph, welcome on board, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Thank you.
Richard, nice to see you again. How are you doing?
Yes, sir. Yes, we continue.
I like that. I like that.
Thank you so much, Professor Osage. I mean, it's always insightful to have you speak and hear you give a background to subject matters. We appreciate you, and we continue to look forward to your partnership on the Tell Africa initiative. Before I go over to the Emeritus Professor Richard Joseph, who wakes and sleeps as an African, I would want to call upon a distinguished professor also, Professor Onyeso, who she's distinguished herself in the area of gender interventions, and among other things. She was, until recently, international president for the Women International League for Peace and Freedom. So she's a Nigerian that should actually be celebrated the more. So, Professor Joy, you are welcome on board. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. My warmest regards. The organizers of this event, is a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for this conversation, which is very apt and really, really coming at the right time. When we talk about issues relating to leadership and development, it continues to gain currency around the world, especially in developing countries like Nigeria. And the simple reason is that these two concepts, leadership and development, have a direct bearing on the well-being of the masses, especially the poor masses. So if we look at Nigeria, it is generally acknowledged that we're blessed in all ramifications. We have all the resources, but we're bankrupt with visionary and selfless leaders. The growth, our development doesn't match the resources that we have within the country. And this now highlights the critical issues of leadership, development, and inclusive governance. We're at that phase in Nigeria where we really need to start looking at effective national leadership development strategy. So I'm really excited that we have in our midst here today His Excellency, who will be sharing his perspective and some of his retrospects. When we look at critical areas in Nigeria, I'm talking about gender inclusion, conflict resolution and transformation, security architecture, agriculture, and elections. We would see that our country is limping, if not almost crippled. And our economy is suffering from lack of effective policies and inadequate implementation mechanisms. Because the argument has always been, oh, but we have policies. But when we look at the implementation framework, we see that there is a huge gap between the policies we have and the implementation on ground. We also see the divide in terms of the class of implementation, who has access to what resources, who actually gets involved, who actually gets to participate. This brings to fore the question of executive decision making or indecision and its impact on the populace. Who bears the brunt? What kind of quality and value system do we want to have in place in Nigeria? We saw the impact of COVID-19 globally, and in Nigeria in particular, the fragility of our system and the corruption as in our systems were exposed. Sadly, we haven't seen a leveraging on the lessons learned, because we would have thought that the doors of opportunities for reform and growth that were opened would have been leveraged on to create some of the transformation that we really want to see in the country. If we look at the current security crisis in Nigeria, we see that it has deepened. Practically all parts of the country is facing one form of violence or conflict. We have the prevalent herders farmers conflict. We see kidnapping, banditry, militancy, terrorism, and all other forms of conflict across Nigeria. Before we say it's in the northeast, now it's everywhere. South, southeast, all part of Nigeria. And we haven't seen strong and effective leadership in addressing these issues. We ponder over our past performance, even our non-performance, we would realize that we have lost a few or even many golden opportunities, mainly due to ineffective and corrupt leadership over the years. During the recent review of the Constitution, Nigeria lost an opportunity to take a bold action on our various commitments on women's empowerment and inclusive governance. We saw all the 4 gender bills that were presented were rejected. This same lack of inclusion permeates our electoral system. We have a system and process that most citizens do not trust, and that's why we witness a lot of voters apathy. Conflict, violence, and countless electoral petitions are hallmarks of our elections. It is very obvious that we need to change the current trajectory. It is often said that how well a society treats its women is one of the strongest indicators of the success and health of that society. So it is not surprising that Nigeria is burdened with this avalanche of issues, seeing the lack of inclusiveness and enabling environment for the empowerment of women. I'm really excited at the opportunity this conversation opens up, bearing in mind that we're in the middle of an active electoral period. This is the time that we have to elect representatives that can take bold executive decisions to move the nation forward. My dream is to see a Nigerian that is inclusive, with an effective leadership, maximizing our potentials, and really trailing the blaze as the giant of Africa in actions and not just in name. So thank you so much for having me here. I look forward to the conversations and interactions that we have. And it's really a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Joy. And we look forward to further comments from you as we proceed. I would now call on Emeritus Professor Richard Joseph from the Northwestern University in the United States, who has been very passionate, and I mean very passionate about Tell Africa to get things going. And there's something, some interesting story I heard about Prof. He was a lecturer in the late 70s in Nigeria in UI, Ibadan School of Thought, and somehow the students that he's lectured, they are all doing profoundly well across the globe now. And there's this contestation on, okay, is Prof a Nigerian or a US citizen? So we would like to know where you want to place yourself, Prof. So Prof, Emeritus Professor Richard Joseph, you're welcome on board.
Richard, if I can save you the problem of your location. First, you are a human being, which I know you are to be, but not just a human being, a humane and humanitarian human being, which to me is very important. Whether you are black or white, yellow or red, you are a humane and humanitarian human being. But more importantly, anybody who looks at you has no doubt at where he can place you. And then, of course, your reputation as an African. Even here in Nigeria. But whether you are a Nigerian or a Ghanaian or an American, what matters to me is you are a black, humane, and humanitarian human being. I don't know whether that describes you adequately, but you can describe yourself whichever way you want after that, Richard.
Thank you much. Thank you much, sir. And, in reflecting on this important occasion, I have been looking back over about 40 plus years of engagement. And although there are many developments in the past, I would like to call upon President Obasanjo to address. My comments today, I'll have the opportunity to intervene at various times, is what Professor Asage has said about Nigeria not being where it should be and Africa not being where it should be. So I have prepared some comments and I will read them. Thank you. When I first arrived in Nigeria at the end of February 1976, this was just a few weeks after President Obasanjo, then General Obasanjo, became Nigeria's head of state following the slaying of General Murtala Muhammad. We have interacted at several times since that occasion, momentous occasion. In September 1996, I wrote him a letter while he was imprisoned by the Abacha regime. It concluded, "Our paths are destined to cross again. I hope that in our respective realms, we can help put together what has been severely sundered," and I'm referring to Nigeria. How